Have you ever dreamed about making your perfect game? The game to end all games, the big enchilada. But no matter how many times you try, it feels like it's impossible to make. Maybe it's because the idea is so precious to you that you fight creative block. Or perhaps the scope of the game is just too much for one person. Today, I'll share about my dream game, Fuzzites, a creature raiser game inspired by Sonic Adventure's Chow Garden system. I'll also share my failed attempts over the last 11 years and the challenges I faced along the way. So grab your time machines and get ready to go back over a decade to where it all began. But first, I have to give a major shout out to the channel's first official sponsor, Core. Core is an awesome, free new game creation platform that lets you build, publish, and play games. If you're new to making games, Core is a great way to start, especially if you want to quickly set up 3D multiplayer games. And the best part is no coding is needed. You can get started right away using thousands of free, high-quality sounds, art assets, and even music. But if you'd like to be a big boy programmer, Core also lets you create your own game engine logic using Lua. You can build games from scratch or remix and reimagine content shared by other creators. And when you're ready to publish, your game will go live instantly on the Core platform just with a little click. As I mentioned before, Core takes away all of the hassle that usually goes into making a game, such as doing multiplayer networking, which is normally a huge pain. Just trust me on this. In addition, Core recently got a $15 million investment from Epic Games and has announced a 50% revenue share with top creators. That's double the share of what Roblox currently has. Core also just announced their latest game jam in partnership with Level 80, the City Building Jam, with 5 diverse categories and dozens of winners and a massive prize pool of $25K. The premise is simple: recreate your favorite real-life city using Core. This jam is a great way to improve and show off your skills, not to mention potentially winning a lot of money. That's nice. And if you're interested, the jam already started. Core is free, so you might as well jump over there and give it a shot. And make sure to check the description for more information. So our story begins 11 years ago. At the time, I was extremely obsessed with Sonic Adventures. This is happening! There was nothing better than rolling around at the speed of sound. But what changed my life forever was when I accidentally walked into the elevator in the first game, and I found it took me to this place called a Chow Garden. And what was so fascinating for me was the breeding mechanic and how you could get different versions of Chow. So to say I fell in love with this game at a young age was an understatement. I was so obsessed. And this was during the heyday of the creature raiser genre. You had games like Tamagotchi, Neopets, Chocobo Racing, Monster Rancher, Pokemon. The list goes on and on. But after a while, the genre started to fade away, and there really weren't any games that could rival or even compare to Sonic Adventures. So instead of waiting around for the next big game, I decided that it was up to me to make it myself. So I began to sketch and create pixel art for what would be a franchise of games that would never see the light of day. So obviously I needed some sort of creature, and I came up with the very original idea of Fuzzites, little fuzzy ball rabbit type guys that you could raise, train, and even breed to get different colors or types. Now, because I did so many versions of this game, I'm gonna have to kind of talk through each one of these very quickly. Now, my first attempt at Fuzzites was in Game Maker 7. Really what I wanted to do was just recreate Sonic Adventures, but with my own creatures. But I didn't know 3D, so I thought, why not just do a side-scroller 2D game? As you can tell, it was hideous. I didn't know much, and I didn't get very far because at the time, I literally just started programming. I was 13, and there wasn't a whole lot of support for Game Maker, so learning was actually quite difficult. It also didn't help that the computer I worked on didn't have internet, so basically all I had to read was the GML guide. And let me tell you, it was not a fun experience. It wasn't until quite a few years later that I tried to recreate it using Construct 2. This version of the game was mostly similar, except for you'll notice one thing. The Fuzzites look a little bit different, and you'll notice that this is a trend throughout the years. Now, other than the pretty visuals, I didn't really get super far with this version either. You could pick up, you could pet, you could feed them, but there still wasn't any stats, and this is where I started to run into a little bit of a problem. One of the reasons why the chow mechanic was so fun was because it was a side mechanic. It wasn't the main part of the game. You could run around as Sonic, do your stuff, and then come back and raise your chow. It made the world feel alive, but it was also a nice break from the main gameplay. Now, what I started to notice when I would work on Fuzzites is I made Fuzzites the main mechanic of the game. And that's kind of boring, just waiting around, waiting for something to grow up and having nothing else to do. So to combat this, I tried to make Fuzzites again, but this time in GameMaker Studio. This was a couple years ago before the Stardew Valley genre of games wasn't super popular, so I thought about why don't I make something similar to that. It's a top-down game, you raise your Fuzzites, but then you go out and you talk with people and maybe there's farming or something. I don't know what I was thinking. I also was inspired by Animal Crossing having a real-time system, and maybe if you played the game around midnight, you could find a secret Fuzzite in the forest. It was really more focused on exploration and looking around and finding resources to give your Fuzzites, which I felt like was a step in the right direction, but ultimately the scope of the game was way too much for the free time that I had at that point. So about a year later, I was messing with Construct again, doing multiplayer stuff. I think I was working on Wizbirds at the time, and I thought, what if I make Fuzzites, but I make it like a little MMORPG or online game? MMOs tend to be very grindy, so I thought it'd be cool that you could get a different Fuzzite depending on what task you're doing. Say you're woodcutting or you're fishing, that could actually change the look of your Fuzzite, and I felt like this was starting to be a little bit more unique and less generic. I also figured that Fuzzites should have a purpose, so I created this really cool grid-based combat system that, to be honest, I still love to this day. And it's super easy on networking because no one has to see it. Now, out of all the Fuzzite games, this is probably the one I'm going to revisit and finish. It's fantastic, and most of the netcode is already established here, and to be honest, I feel like this is one of the most unique ways of having a creature raiser game, but also having social interaction. But at the time, I was working on Wizbirds, and I didn't want to get distracted, so I put the project on the shelf and kind of left it. The last two versions of Fuzzites are more prototypes than anything. The first one I submitted with the help of Janky Bread for the Great Autumn Game Jam that we did last year. You can basically do nothing in this game other than watch your Fuzzite walk around and click things. The gameplay was more like a Tamagotchi, and we only had a day to make it, so that's why it's lacking. Another reason why it was simple is I was just learning Godot at the time. And the final version of Fuzzites that I worked on was something I actually did about a month ago. It was more so an experiment seeing if I could do 2.5D in Godot, and it actually looks pretty nice. Sadly, I don't want to show too much because I may have something secret planned with it down the road. But it was cool to finally be able to bring Fuzzites into the dimension that I always wanted it. So there you go. Those are all the versions of Fuzzites that I've done over the past 11 years. Now, I'm sure many of you out there are pulling your hair and are about to comment that I had too much scope creep. And you're partly right. But I think the heart of the issue is the game I created in my head as a kid was just so special to me that creating anything that doesn't perfectly represent that idea isn't worth making. And this is why nostalgia and falling in love with an idea is so dangerous, because you're more interested in forcing your idea to work and instead of adapting it to something that actually does. Another thing was I was young and I didn't have any accountability to actually force myself to finish a game. And the other part that I already mentioned is I have to make sure that Fuzzites is the secondary part of the gameplay. Unless it's something more like Pokemon where you're actively battling. It's just too hard to have your Fuzzite be the main part of the game. It's boring, you sit around doing nothing. For those of you out there that like Fuzzites and would like to see me finish it, let me know which version of the game you like the most. To be honest, the online version is my favorite, and I definitely want to finish it at some point. And if you're in the same boat as me, trying to make your dream game but failing over and over again, just remember that don't put your idea on a pedestal. Look at it objectively and think about what would make a fun game. And sometimes you have to swallow your pride, and it may not turn out the game that you exactly want, and that's perfectly okay. And I just want to give a huge shout out to CosmonDev and the other Patreon supporters. All your support goes towards making videos, and if you'd like to see behind the scenes footage of me talking about stuff and access to secret content, make sure to check out my Patreon. Also, don't forget to check out Core. It's completely free. Just visit coregames.com or click the link in the description. I just want to thank you guys for watching this video. You're amazing. If you like it, make sure to subscribe and like the video. I hope you guys have a fantastic week, and I will see you next time for another game dev adventure.